Welcome to Anderson Alchemy. I'm your host, Brandy Anderson. This is a space for inner work, shadow work, and transformation, where we move beyond surface understanding and begin to engage the deeper layers of the psyche, the symbolic, the unconscious, the unseen forces shaping who we are becoming. This is the work of inner alchemy. Hello, everyone. I've been thinking a lot about free will lately, or more accurately, it feels like the question of free will keeps finding me. It's been very synchronistic lately in things I'm reading, in dreams, in random conversations. How free are we really? The deeper I explore consciousness, psychology, spirituality, and especially astrology, the more I seem to ponder this question. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I probably would have said, of course we have free will. We make decisions every day. We choose our careers, our relationships, what we have for breakfast, where we live. It feels obvious that we're in control of our lives. But the more I understand the influence of unconscious conditioning, the less certain I become. In reality, our early conditioning shapes the trajectory of our life path. And this early conditioning is often a continuation of past life patterns. Some would understand this as karma, but regardless of what you would call it, our lives all have a momentum. And when I reflect on my own life, I can see how my childhood shapes the way I related to people. I can see how fear influenced decisions I thought were perfectly rational. I can see how my personality naturally pulled me toward certain books or certain ideas, certain people. Even or especially my spiritual journey, it feels very much like something I was being led into, one experience at a time. And I think about all the things I never consciously chose. Like I didn't choose my temperament. I didn't choose to be an introvert. I didn't choose the experiences that wounded me or the ones that opened me up. So if I didn't choose the things that shaped me, how much of what I call my choices are actually arising from all those influences? And that's become a fascinating question for me. The more I study psychology, the less convinced I am that the ego is really driving the bus. Jung talks about complexes, these unconscious structures that influence our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without us even realizing it. We think we're making decisions, but often it's a complex making the decision for us. And then I started studying astrology more seriously. And one of the things that continually amazes me is how accurately it can describe our lives. The natal chart is a blueprint of the soul's journey through this incarnation. It's not just broad personality descriptions. It contains astonishingly specific details about an individual's psychological makeup, recurring life themes, innate gifts, developmental challenges, and even the timing of significant periods of growth and change. The precision is uncanny. I once thought astrology was just mystical nonsense, very woo-woo. Horoscopes struck me as generalizations that could apply to anyone. The description of my sun sign never really resonated all that much either. But then I got a natal chart reading from an astrologer, and I was stunned by the precision and accuracy of what he told me. After that reading, I began to study astrology myself, and what really stood out to me was the mathematical precision that goes into casting and reading charts. My personal use of astrology is more archetypal. I use it as a tool to help with shadow work, to help me pinpoint particular complexes and patterns, and to understand the energy just flowing at a particular time so that I might best work with it. But astrology can be used in a more predictive manner. As I've looked into Vedic and horary astrology, I've come to see that many aspects of our incarnation are predetermined. And I find myself asking if these patterns can be mapped in our natal chart before they happen with striking precision. What does that say about free will? Then there are dreams. Dreams have become some of my greatest teachers because they so often know what's happening before my conscious mind catches up. They compensate for my blind spots. They point me toward things I haven't admitted to myself yet. They seem to have their own intelligence, as if some deeper part of the psyche is already working toward wholeness, whether my conscious mind understands it or not. And the more I engage with my dreams, the more I see how guided my life really is. Astrology highlights the parameters, and dreams illuminate the divine guidance. And all of life is designed to awaken us. Every aspect of this incarnation is working to bring us into our highest life path. So again, the question of free will arises. Are we free agents, or are our lives predetermined? I think it's both and. I would say we aren't really free until we awaken. It seems that we're bound by our unconscious conditioning, and individuation, which is something I talked about in the last episode, is what frees us. We simply can't make a free choice until we're able to see with clarity, until we make the unconscious conscious, which is to say, until we do our shadow work. We're not free agents. We're reacting instead of acting with free will. We do make some choices, like every moment is filled with potential, but we're making our choices within a narrow paradigm. Our beliefs, our fears, our unconscious habits are pushing us into a particular choice. Bernardo Kastrup uses a metaphor that perfectly describes our situation. We have agency, but it's the agency of a small rowboat on a raging sea. That resonates deeply. We absolutely do have agency. We can row, we can adjust our direction, we can respond to the waves, but we don't control the ocean itself. In reality, free will is a contradiction in terms. There's freedom and there's will, but there is no such thing as free will because the will is conditioned. And that's the raging sea. To ask, do we have free will, is really asking the wrong question, I think. The answer isn't as simple as saying we're either completely free or completely determined. It seems to be something in between, which explains why so many people wrestle with the question. Perhaps we're far less free than our egos imagine, and yet far more deeply held and sustained than we realize. There was a time when I really pushed against a deterministic view of reality. Like something about it felt wrong, considering all of the seemingly awful choices that people make. And the Calvinistic view within the church was completely off-putting to me. Like the idea that everyone is predestined either for heaven or for eternal damnation, it just didn't sit right. And looking back, I can see that the Christian paradigm was limiting my perspective and creating a tension between a loving God who desires that everyone be restored and a rigid judge-like God who would predestine some of his creation for eternal torment. The idea that we get only one short physical incarnation to get things right or we burn in hell forever is a very nihilistic view of reality. It limits the scope of God's grace and it diminishes the power of love. So once I shifted away from that paradigm and into a reincarnational worldview, things came into sharper focus. Perhaps the Calvinists were right all along. Perhaps physical life is predetermined, but not in the way that they think. The game isn't rigged. It's designed. It's designed for our liberation, designed to bring us into alignment. Not some for heaven and some for hell, but all toward reconciliation and wholeness. And when I say designed, I don't mean every play has already been scripted. I mean the field itself has been prepared. There are parameters within which genuine choice still exists. Take football, for example. The field is already laid out, the boundaries are marked, the rules are established, the time clock is running. Like players don't get to decide the size of the field or how many downs they have or where the goalposts are located or what counts as a penalty. Those parameters are all given. But within those parameters, the game isn't meaningless or mechanical. The players still make decisions. They read what's happening, they respond, they take risks, and they miss opportunities. And they have to change strategy at times. Their choices do affect how the game unfolds. And I think physical life may work in a similar way. We incarnate into a set of parameters, but within those parameters, we participate, we respond, we make choices according to what we're capable of seeing at that point in our development. And I think this is a very important point because not every player sees the same possibilities on the field. A more experienced player can read the game differently. He notices openings that a less experienced player can't see. And I think consciousness works that way too. We can only choose from the possibilities we're able to perceive. And as our consciousness expands, our range of choice expands with it. So perhaps freedom is not the ability to step outside the game entirely. Perhaps it's the growing ability to participate more consciously within the conditions we've been given. So, do we have free will? Well, as Schopenhauer famously said, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. That's an incredible statement. You can choose according to your desires, but you don't choose the desires themselves. And I think this is where we could have a lot more grace for ourselves and others if we understood that all of us are operating out of a conditioned will. We often look at the choices others are making with disdain. We believe people are freely making absurd or even evil choices. But what we don't see is the underlying condition that made those choices probable. We don't understand the momentum of the overwhelming compulsions that someone else is rowing against in their tiny rowboat. And how could we? We're mostly oblivious to our own compulsions. We think we're making free choices, but most of us aren't even rowing very much. We're just riding the wave of our conditioning, all the while believing that we're making rational decisions in our lives. We're driven by our complexes, which are like unconscious programs running beneath the surface of awareness. And it's not just a memory or an emotion. It's an entire pattern of perceiving and feeling and interpreting and reacting that's been shaped throughout our entire lived experience. It's so pervasive that we're largely unaware of it. When a complex is activated, we don't usually know what's happening. We think, I'm making this decision, or this is just who I am, or I'm the one who's seeing the situation clearly. But the bigger question is, who is making the decision? Is it really your conscious ego? Or is it your father complex or your mother complex, your abandonment wound, your need for approval, your fear of rejection? The complex has a kind of gravitational pull. It bends reality around itself. And I'm sure you felt it, even if you've never named it or thought much about it. We all know what it feels like to be pulled into a complex. It feels like an overwhelming compulsion to speak or act in a certain way. It's so automatic, we don't even think about it. And it usually comes with a significant emotional charge. And we all have complexes, but we don't all have the same complexes. Two people can walk into the exact same situation and experience two completely different worlds because they're each looking through the lens of a different unconscious conditioning. In reality, we're not nearly as conscious as we imagine ourselves to be. In fact, I think one of the greatest ironies of life is that people who feel most certain they're acting objectively are the ones most possessed by unconscious forces. And this is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. I think that's one of the most profound statements ever written. Because from the perspective of the ego, it feels like we're freely choosing. But the good news is we can experience genuine liberation from the complexes by becoming aware of the unconscious conditioning. And that's what it means to do our shadow work. The more conscious we become, the more we're able to make free choices. And that's where our free will really lies. We're not born free, but we have the potential to become free through a shift in consciousness. Real freedom isn't doing whatever we want. That's anarchy. Real freedom is having the ability to choose from a place of clarity and equanimity. It's the ability to see through illusion and choose accordingly. Freedom is no longer being controlled by unconscious forces. But that naturally raises another question. If consciousness is what sets us free, then how does consciousness actually grow? And I don't think we awaken simply by accumulating more knowledge. We don't become free by reading more books or collecting more spiritual concepts. Something has to challenge the very conditioning that keeps us bound. And that's where I think incarnation begins to make sense. Perhaps every limitation, every relationship, every disappointment, every season of uncertainty is part of a much larger process that's slowly bringing us into greater awareness. In other words, maybe the parameters and limitations of life aren't trying to control us. Maybe they are there to liberate us. I don't think incarnation is about expressing our freedom. I think it's about developing it. When we arrive here, we aren't blank slates. We come with conditioning, karma, temperament, family systems, unconscious patterns. We're immediately immersed in limitation. And limitation isn't bad, it's necessary. It's the pressure that shapes us. Without resistance, we wouldn't grow and evolve. It's like the biosphere study where trees were grown in an environmentally controlled biosphere without wind or inclement weather. The trees grew tall very quickly, but then they toppled over. They were uprooted. Without the wind, they didn't develop stress wood, so they were easily uprooted. And the same is true of us. Without resistance, we don't develop in a way that is sustainable, which brings us to the topic of suffering. And no one likes to suffer. In fact, most spirituality and self-help is designed to avoid suffering. We often frame suffering as punishment. We think if we pray enough, become spiritual enough, have enough faith, then we won't suffer. But anyone who's lived long enough has noticed life really is one damn thing after the next. It's a blend of both pleasure and pain. We experience both the magic and the tragic regardless of our beliefs and actions. Jesus said the rain falls on both the righteous and the wicked. And I've come to see suffering not as punishment, but as feedback. And I'm sure you've heard the saying, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering is what happens when we're attached to particular outcomes, when we're identified with the world of form, when we're resisting what life is trying to teach us. Suffering reveals where I'm not free. And if I learn to see it as feedback, I can drop the narratives I'm spinning around it. I can let go of whatever is causing my suffering. Freedom is in the center of the suffering. And life really isn't trying to make us suffer. It's trying to liberate us. Every difficulty, every disappointment, every uncomfortable truth is pointing us toward the next place where consciousness wants to expand. And I must say here, I don't think we have to suffer in order to awaken. It need not be so. However, it is most often our greatest teacher. The more we resist life, the more we suffer. And suffering becomes inevitable when we cling to an identity that no longer serves our growth. Paradoxically, it's our resistance to pain that causes our suffering. And it's our conscious participation, our decision to see what the suffering is revealing within us, that actually brings about transformation and liberation. I don't think our lives are scripted like a screenplay where every line is already written. I believe the future remains genuinely open. Our choices matter. Other people's choices matter. Evil is real, and people can wound one another through their relatively free choices. But we're only really free to the degree that we're aware of our shadow material. We have agency, but we exercise it within a landscape that's already been shaped long before we are aware of it, which means not every painful experience was destined in advance, but whatever does happen becomes part of the curriculum. Life has an astonishing capacity to weave even our worst moments into the ongoing work of our liberation. Nothing is wasted. The psyche keeps using whatever we've been given to invite us into greater wholeness. And ultimately, I believe freedom is where all this is heading. Not just my freedom or your freedom, but the liberation of consciousness itself. The end of the story isn't a humanity forever trapped by fear and trauma and the karmic pull of unconscious compulsion. The end of the story is restoration and reconciliation. It's people who have become fully themselves, not driven by complexes, not imprisoned by shame or fear, but freely expressing the image of God buried within them. And that doesn't mean we become passive. It doesn't mean we shrug our shoulders and say, well, whatever happens, happens. The point of life is to participate. We can cooperate with the process or resist it. We have that choice. We can face our shadow or avoid it. We can respond to life's invitations or we can postpone them. But when we refuse to learn what life is trying to teach us, we don't escape the lesson. We suffer and we carry it forward. Now, whether you understand that as karma or reincarnation or something else, the unfinished work remains unfinished until it is integrated. And maybe that is the most comforting thing that I've come to believe. Like, I don't have to force my awakening. I don't have to anxiously orchestrate every detail of my life or worry that one wrong decision will derail my soul forever. Life is already conspiring toward wholeness. Every relationship, every disappointment, every unexpected turn is another invitation to wake up. And my responsibility isn't to control the ocean, it's to become conscious enough to recognize what the next wave is asking of me. So yes, keep rowing. Do your shadow work. Choose courage when you can. Tell the truth. Love well. Participate in your own liberation. but maybe also relax a little bit. Trust that life is working for your highest good, because this incarnation is not the end of the story, and neither is your suffering. All is guiding all. So perhaps the question isn't, do I have free will? Perhaps the better question is, what in me is still unfree? Because that's where the work begins. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it gives you something to reflect on. As always, these are questions I'm still wrestling with myself, so I genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Do you think we have free will? Has your perspective changed over time? Come find me on Substack and join the conversation in the comments. I always enjoy hearing the different ways people think about these topics. And thank you for joining me for this episode of Anderson Alchemy. As always, cosmic blessings and peace.